pretty sure there's something in my house that's been mimicking my brother. It's very strange. The first experience I had with it was years ago. It started when I went to bed. I made a mental note that I forgot to fill my water bottle, and that I would just refill it when I woke up tomorrow. After relaxing in my bed, I fell asleep. Later, I woke up in the middle of the night. I don't remember what time it was, but I was really thirsty and decided to go to the bathroom. I got up from my bed, picked up my water bottle, and headed to the bathroom. For context, you can see my brother's and parents' rooms when you are walking to the bathroom. I looked into my parents' room and saw my brother looking on my father's side of the bed. I thought he must have been sick, or I was just very sleepy and seeing things. So I went into my bathroom and got some tap water and did my business. I was in the bathroom for maybe 5 minutes. When I left, I looked back into my parents' room and still saw my brother. I started walking over to see if he needed anything. I got halfway down the hallway until I realized it didn't feel like him. Something was off. I got the urge to check on my brother, so I looked in his room and saw him sleeping in his bed. I looked back, and the figure was still there. I was confused, so I just walked back into my room and fell asleep. When I woke up, I was confused because I thought it was a weird dream. I reached for my water bottle and realized it was half full, which meant that everything had happened last night. I later asked my brother if he was in our parents' room last night, and he said no. Another time was when I was sitting in my room playing video games. I heard the garage door open and my dog started barking. I could hear the door open and my brother's voice say to my dogs, "Get off." It was faint, but still there. The dogs calmed down. It was quiet besides some noise from downstairs and curtains opening. After a while, I heard my brother's footsteps go up the stairs without stopping. I looked at my door because it's impossible to get to his room without passing mine, but he never came. I got up and walked to the stairs. No one was there. My dogs weren't there. The house was completely silent. I was confused, so I walked downstairs. Things were open, like doors. The toilet seat was left up, and the curtains were open, but no one was there. I opened the door to the garage that was cracked open, and no one was there. No car, no nothing. I honestly don't know what to make of this situation. There are more stories of whatever is copying my brother, but those were the big ones. I'm 17, almost 18 next month, and I have had many experiences with the supernatural. And as a child, I often would stay awake all night hearing noises around me. Let me start off. I grew up in London, UK, but originally I am from Punjab, India, and I was also born there, but came to the UK when I was 3, so I basically grew up here. In my culture, there is a lot of people who tend to do black magic, and they do it around the Indian festival of Diwali. Not to ward off dark spirits, but to bring them. Often they will leave candles to burn in the middle of the street, and it is believed that anyone who is passing by will have all the sins of the person who placed the candle put onto them, meaning the other person has a passerby sacrifice for their pleasure. This is an actual event that I experienced when I was 8. It doesn't really have anything to do with Diwali or black magic, but I was staying at my grandparents' residence in India during summer holidays, and I remember that my dad was staying over at his friend's place. It was midnight, around 11 p.m., and everyone was asleep except me. The only other people in the house was my grandpa, who was paralyzed due to a stroke, my grandma, and my cousin's sister. I couldn't sleep that night since I had overeaten during dinner, and I decided to walk some laps in the corridor of the small bungalow. The moment I tiptoed out of the room where me and my grandma were sleeping, I was surprised to see my grandma standing in the corner of where an old chair lay, and I was bewildered since I swore I just saw her in a deep sleep in the room. So I decided to peer back in the room, and my grandma was still fast asleep. My mind began to race and I felt like I was going to faint. When I looked back to the corridor, my grandma was still standing near the fridge, smiling. I decided to remain quiet since I didn't want anyone to wake up and get angry at me for still being awake. So I decided to walk towards the figure. The figure, which seemed to look like my grandma, started to speak and say, You want to come and play with the dolls while standing on the balcony? I was so surprised that my grandma was saying that, since she was always too tired or busy to play with me, so I agreed. We walked to the balcony where we could view the rest of the town. It was pitch dark, and all the street vendors had long gone home. I looked down the street and saw the house next to us. There had been an old couple who lived there, but had died when I was around 2, and it was abandoned. But what caught my eye was that my grandma was standing in their garden, waving, and screaming at me to jump from the balcony, and she promised to catch me in time. I began to panic, and I was about to jump off, when I remembered that this was not my grandma, and I was probably just dreaming. So I decided to walk back down. As I was walking back into the house, I felt something grab the back of my collar. I turned around and it was my grandma, but this time, it didn't sound like her. She was screaming at me for not doing as she said, and that I was going to be punished. I used my quick instincts and what I had learned from the horror movies that I had watched, and I decided to run back into the house and wake up my real grandma. Obviously, when I got back in, I could still feel the presence of the entity, but my grandma was just not waking up and was such in a deep, deep sleep. I decided to lay back in bed, despite all that had just happened. I was just about to close my eyes and doze off when I saw something standing near the cabinet, with its limbs contorted and tongue out. It had long hair and a blue face. I tried not to scream. It looked exactly like what I perceived to be Chudel, an Indian female ghost. I don't know what happened after that, but I somehow just fell asleep. And I haven't told anyone I know about this since that day, because I know no one would believe me. When I was around 12, my family went on a vacation to the mountains. Where I live, snow is a rare treat, so we were excited. We built snowmen, ate snacks, and did all the usual vacation stuff. We hadn't planned on staying late, but a sudden snowstorm forced us to stay at an old bed and breakfast. That night, while I was sleeping, I heard a strange noise outside, like someone stepping on sticks and twigs. Curious, I peeked through the curtains and saw a man dancing in the oddest, most unnatural way. I had no idea how long he'd been out there. At the time, I just assumed he was drunk from partying nearby. The next morning, while checking out, I asked the old lady who ran the place if any other guests had been disturbed by the noise. She looked at me strangely and said, "You were the only guest here. No one comes unless it's an emergency." I shrugged it off. Maybe I was imagining things. I was only 12 after all. Several years later, my family decided to visit the same place again. We stayed at the same bed and breakfast. The old lady remembered us. That night, I heard the same noise again. Only this time, it felt like someone was inside my room. I lifted my head slightly, and there he was. The same man, dancing in that same twisted, unnatural way. I screamed and turned on the light. My brother rushed in, and he was gone. No footprints, no signs of breaking in, nothing. I haven't gone back since. Every time it snows now, I swear I can hear him, just outside, stepping lightly on twigs, dancing in the darkness, waiting. I have shared many stories on here, but I felt it important to tell you all where it began. I grew up in a family of very superstitious aunties. At age 13 is when I was told these stories by multiple family members, including my parents. However, I can remember many of the stories as they spoke of this house my whole childhood and on. And these are the stories I was told. When I was only about 10 months old, my mother and father were looking for a larger home, as they already had my older brother, myself, and my mother was also pregnant, at the time with my second youngest brother. We lived in a small town where everyone knew everyone, so a friend of a friend told my parents of a place right by the lakefront, and it was close to the hospital, actually, right across from the hospital my mother was to give birth to my baby brother. Not to mention it was fully furnished because the man who owned it had it passed to him through his two aunts who passed from cancer. Apparently he wasn't close to them, even describing them as mean, and didn't feel comfortable living in the home, and felt it needed a family to line it up and give it some happiness, my mother later told me. Fast forward to a month later, and we are living in this beautiful bungalow-style home with big oak doors and shutters on the windows, as well as a library with a nice old rocking chair my mother could read to us in. It started off with small things, like when my grandma would bring her favorite little Yorkie over, he would just stare and bark at the stairs over and over, hair standing straight, growling and all. My grandma stopped bringing him by because of this, but no one thought this was strange. Just saying I would have. But anyways, one day my mom was filling our kiddie pool with a hose running from the basement window, so the water wouldn't be cold for us. But my brother kept pushing on it, and my mother was afraid he would fall through it, so she asked my gramps, who was visiting, if he could watch us while she went and locked it. At this time, it was only my mom, my gramps, and me, and my brother home. My mom grabbed the laundry basket off the dryer and went to lock the window, but it was already locked. She thought it to be strange, but my gramps said it must have been our guardian angels keeping us safe. But my brother said, "No, Mom, it's the man in the big boots." This was the first time he mentioned the man in the big boots, but it definitely wouldn't be the last. As the days went on, things became increasingly active, from big doors and windows blowing open multiple times every night, to my parents waking up in the middle of the night to see my brother talking to the man in the big boots. One day, my brother and I were playing on the kitchen floor while my mother was making coffee, when she passed over us with a pot of hot coffee. As she did, the carafe busted over us. Luckily, my father rushed us into a cold bath, and we didn't have any serious burns. But when she looked at the bottom of the coffee pot, there was a perfect circle cut from the bottom. At this point, the whole family knew our house was haunted, and many were even afraid to visit. But my parents were young, and my father was the breadwinner, and they had a third child on the way with a big house with cheap rent. They looked at it as taking the good with the bad, I guess. Soon they found out from my big brother that the two old ladies didn't like us there, but the man in the big boots, who my brother described looking like an old fisherman, wanted to protect us. So my grandmother's 50th birthday, they arranged to have a psychic to come to our home and finally find out what was in our house, or who. All of my aunties and uncles showed up, and believe me, I have a lot, as well as some good friends. Everyone wanted to know what was in our house. But when the psychic finally arrived, she refused to pass through the mudroom. She took one look and said, "This house is evil. You must leave here now." Everyone laughed, taking the lady as a joke. She left, and they decided they were all going to go out for the night, as my mother was finishing getting ready in the upstairs bathroom. My aunts and uncles watched me, crawling all around as I had just started. While talking about the crazy psychic, I began climbing the stairs while they watched over me. I was trying to reach my mother at the top of the stairs. As I got to the first landing, I was lifted into the air and thrown down to the front door, and a loud voice yelled, "Get out!" That was the proof I guess they all needed, because we were out by the end of the month. There were so many other things that happened that are beyond explanation and crazy, but I would be writing a book at that point. Have a paranormal experience of your own? Share it with us at officialphantom.mike@gmail.com. Whether in text or voice recording, we want to hear your story. Thank you for tuning in to Phantom Mike, and remember, if you still feel alone, you weren't listening closely enough.